May 15th, 2019. I just want to bring up an issue with when we're speaking. If you could speak, you don't have to be right up to the mic, but be.
Testing.
Apparently,
testing,
I'm
testing.
very much louder on that. It's got my attention that they couldn't hear Dawn, so we need to.
There is no big problem there.
Speak up louder into the microphone so that Wingspan can get what we're trying to say. All right. First order of business is the minutes. Do we have a motion to approve?
I
those?
make a motion to approve the minutes.
Is there?
I'll second that motion.
Okay. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I would like to make a quick compliment to Vicki about the minutes. I wasn't here at the last meeting, and so I read through the minutes, and I have to tell you what a great gift it is, the way that Vicki does the minutes. And I knew I could see everything that happened and went on, and it was quite a pleasure reading them. Thank you.
Yeah.
Fun reading.
Mr. Chair, may I add to that? I really like to add that because you're right on, in my opinion, because if anyone wants to see the progress that this college has gone forward in the last 10 years, just read the minutes over those years. It's a history book that somebody ought to write a story about this particular college.
Yeah, I can see that.
You're in the arts.
Yeah, there you go.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes. Thank you, Vicki.
The Game of Thrones.
I don't even know.
All right. Now we'll move to the reports of the board. Staff Senate, we don't have a report. Faculty Senate as well, we don't have a report. So let's have Vice President Rick Johnson give us the construction update, please.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, good evening. I'm going to start with ACC. We often talk about ACC, but we never look at real things at ACC. So hopefully you're seeing this.
Oh, good.
I thought so we've got some progress over there. I thought I'd just show you. It's not much to look at, but this is the glasses on the northeast corner of the building. You see the foundation in the ground going in or done. Next week, we're going to start pouring the slab, I understand, in that space. And then the other corner of the building, same setup. These are roughly the same size. You may remember different functions, but the same size. And then a lot of disruption right there at the entrance where they've been pulling up the sidewalks and getting ready. What you can see here, this is the northeast corner. There's ADA parking that needs to be slotted in right here up against that side of the new classroom. So ACC's on track. We're not hitting any hiccups thus far. We're actually maybe a bit ahead of schedule at this point. I was alerted that the subcontractor that's erecting some of the steel is delayed in the schedule due to other work. And so what Elk Ridge contractors are doing is shifting during this delay. They're going to shift to other work that was actually a little later in the schedule. So they're not going to lose schedule. They're just reordering schedule, so to speak. So not a concern there, but did pop up. BT, Business and Technology, we're still on schedule to start that facade of the building the end of May or maybe right away early June. So that one's on track. The bids for that project will be coming in on May 23rd. That'll be another one of those wonderful bid events where we get to see what's going on in the marketplace, and hopefully it'll be okay. And that's still on track to be done. The interior by start of school in third week in August, and then the exterior we finish in November-ish sometime, depending on how the weather plays out. Fine arts, we're cranking as fast as we possibly can to try to release these early bid packages that I told you about before. The State Construction Management Division has raised some different perspectives about that, and we're trying to work through those right now. They'd like to see us package them together, and rather than go early, we'd like to get some of these out early to, one, capitalize on the bidding environment now rather than worrying about what's yet to come. And it helps our schedule because we want to be done with fine arts renovation by the start of the fall semester 2020. And so losing schedule now potentially complicates that. So we're working closely with them to work out those details. In the background, the design development is virtually finished. On May 31st, we're going to be looking at another round of draft final guaranteed maximum price. So it'll be a tweak to what we last saw. And we'll virtually be done there, and then hopefully have our other arrangements with the state taken care of, and hopefully then getting the rest of the bid packages on the street. So more to follow on that. Res Hall, if you haven't driven in from the west, we've got a huge hole in the ground and an enormous pile of soil. And so there's great progress happening over there. They're digging the foundations, getting ready to move on to digging the hole for the foundations, excuse me. And that's just an enormous hole in the ground. You don't have the opportunity to go inside the fence, but if you look at that pile of soil and kind of envision where that came out of the ground, it's amazing. Just today we hit water, not oil, unfortunately. We expected to hit water. This area around campus has a high water table in many places, some places as high as 6 feet from the soil surface. No hiccups yet on the res hall. Everything is still intact and schedule's intact, and they're still, the architect, the contractor, in conjunction with us, still working to see where we can find some savings to hopefully keep ratcheting that cost down, not up. And so there's a lot on the table with that that's being talked through and evaluated. So we're in good shape there at the moment. And then lastly, EEC, the renovation of the lower level, that's moving at a very rapid pace. Right now, it's all sealed off, of course, but it's virtually completely gutted. It came down really quick. I think the contractor there is trying to really move fast because he's got an obligation to be done August 20th, I believe. So we feel like we're getting great progress there. Later, maybe in midsummer or something, if there's a tour down there. Right now, it's a very dangerous site. There's wires hanging from the ceiling, there's broken glass in there, there's all sorts of stuff. But it would certainly be doable if you want to do that.
Trustee Little.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Rick, I'm going to ask you a question that probably sounds really dumb, but I'm very curious. So coming here tonight, I noticed that work is starting on the Lummis property across the highway. There's signs going up, there's piles of dirt, there's some things going on over there. He's still starting this project. Does that have any effect at all, either contract-wise or physically, on our projects here, because it's just across the road?
Well, I think it's reasonable to assume that it's just another example of there's a high level of construction activity in the region.
Yeah.
Not to mention even right here in Cheyenne, which stresses the labor market, which, for example, Encore Electric, based out of Denver, that has been working up here in Cheyenne, is busing workers in daily to Cheyenne and then busing them back. Stories like that. So yeah, I suppose it does represent pressures on the project, perhaps. What we don't know is, they're doing dirt work, roads. It looks to me, maybe a few home sites. It looks to me from College Drive. I haven't been out there, but across from the training center here is the convention center, restaurant, bowling alley, and it seems like there's something else in there I'm forgetting. I think the last we heard is that's still scheduled to begin here at some point in the future. I don't know what that is, but that's going to ratchet that up another little bit.
Yeah, thank you. That makes perfect sense.
You're welcome.
But it doesn't interfere like with the water table or anything like that, does it? Nothing-
No, but if they hit oil, we're really going to be upset.
Yes, it does.
We're hitting water, they're hitting oil, that's not going to be good.
We can always frack.
Yeah.
The bigger impact I see, which isn't to the projects, but to campus, I mean, a potential negative impact is this complex right across from Training Center. If it does in fact have a convention center, and it is in fact as big as they said and as busy as they hope, potentially we could get some vehicle pressure over here,
Oh, yeah.
which would be very complicating. And I've said to many here that our solution might be to implement a vehicle permit system, a free one, but just to identify that you belong on campus and so the overflow doesn't impact our community.
It's very forward thinking, Rick. Thank you.
And I believe that wraps it up.
Okay.
Mr. Chair,
Yes,
if
Trustee
there are no
Harris.
other questions, Vice President Johnson. Vice President Johnson just rehearsed his presentation at the FNF this morning. So that would be part of the FNF report. And if I may, could I move up the approval of the financial papers at this time, and we could just go right ahead and approve those?
You bet.
Thank you. Given that, I ask that we approve the financial papers for our also purchasing and contract information that we received, and the current budget and the balance sheet that were reviewed by the FNF this morning.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, motion passes. All right, now it is the president's report.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll try to be brief as well. A few things I want to just bring to your attention and chat about. One is just a quick update. I had the opportunity to sit down with Vice President Hay, our Director of Athletics and Campus Recreation, Clark Rasmussen, and members of the Foundation Development Committee, and talk a little bit about how we start to bring some more prominent, more cohesive direction to athletics. And so my title down here, I don't know what that means exactly. It's just what I came up with, the Golden Eagle Athletics Strategic Directions. But there are three sort of disparate parts that we want to bring together. One that everybody knows about, of course, is the conversation about the renovation of the RAC, and as that progresses through the state process, that's certainly something that will impact athletics and campus recreation. The second one is our directive to the foundation over the last few years to continue to increase the number of scholarships, or the amount of scholarships that are directed towards supporting Golden Eagle athletics. And so they have a pretty large goal in terms of actually growing and building that program, as well as growing the booster club. And then the third one, is ones we've been talking about on the fringes, but down in athletics have been really starting to develop quite nicely. And that's really dealing around these concepts of pillars of athletic excellence, and setting I don't know if an expectation is the right word, but actually setting a target for what we want to see in terms of athletics on a variety of fronts, certainly competitiveness, but also student success, community engagement, and all of those things. So where we left that meeting was the intent to pull a group together this summer that would include members of the Board of Trustees, members of the foundation, booster clubs, and then key staff, together to essentially establish an agenda, if you will, for Golden Eagle athletics. Where do we want to see this going, and how do we bring these three things together so they become more of a strategic plan for athletics? And so Really some exciting things there. It helps us chart and understand the direction of where we want to go from an athletics perspective. But also what we're trying to do is bring some coherence and so that we can, as an institution, really set clear direction, clear expectation. And so I share that with you just to give you an update. But more importantly, what I would ask you, Mr. Chairman, is I would like to have 2 appointees from the Board of Trustees to be part of that conversation. I anticipate it'll be only a meeting or 2, not real significant, but we would like to have 2 trustees to be on that team to help us bring all this together and hopefully come up with the final agenda or plan, if you will. And then I imagine that will come back to the entire board for your endorsement this summer at some point. And so I would like to have 2 trustees that could be appointed to that group.
So yeah, if you guys want to just send me your interest in it.
Okay.
And why, because I'm sure there'll be more than 2 that are interested. I guess if we need to vote on them, we can, or however that works.
Perfect.
We'll make a decision.
Are we limited to 2?
I just somebody would ask me that.
We don't want to overload. I understand that. I realize that.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, Trustee Erickson, I wouldn't say we are. I'm trying to avoid having the entire board as part of that so that we can actually get groups together and get some work done. So I'll leave that to the chairman, that if there is a compelling reason for a 3rd appointee or something, I mean, I certainly wouldn't turn that
It may be
away.
so.
No,
I wouldn't turn that
I will
away.
abstain from being on the committee. I already know of 2, so that's 3, and that's 4. So I know, I got 4, so.
Straws?
The joys of being chairman, Mr. Chairman, so, yeah. And then I think appointing those either in between now and then or at the June meeting will suffice. I don't think we'll get together until mid to late June anyways.
Okay,
Yeah,
perfect.
Thank you.
It's a great idea.
Thank you.
It really is. Good.
Mr. Chairman, I was gonna, oh, go ahead.
What's that?
Could you let us know the dates that they might be meeting so that we would know if it fit into our summer schedule?
Ken, at this point, I don't know what those dates are. It'll be late June into mid-July would be my guess. I just don't know the specific dates at this point.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I just have a quick question. Do the athletes go out in the community and like read to students or go into schools, or do they do anything like that right now?
Mr. Chairman, Trustee Thompson, actually surprising the amount of activity many of the athletes have within the community. One of the pieces that I know we've gotten some feedback from, and I've shared this with Associate Vice President Trimble, we need to get those stories out more. It is not a uniform expectation. And so you have certain athletes, certain sports that do a very good job of it. Others that could do more.
Okay.
And so that's part of it. And so when we look across sort of these pillars of excellence that we want to set as benchmarks for all athletes, we've got little pockets, but the expectation isn't clear for everyone to really differentiate. And that's what we want. We want all of our athletes in sports to be engaged in the community. We want them all to be seen as leaders and actively involved on the campus. We want them all to excel academically. We want them, of course, to win. So that's what we're trying to establish is what is that, that direction.
Okay. Hadn't heard. Thank you.
Yeah.
Great. Mr. Chairman, just a link in your agenda to the wonderful commencement details. It's sneaking up on us more quickly than we can imagine, and Saturday will be here. A full day, especially for Trustee Thompson and others. You can plan to spend the whole day with us. So we'll do the main commencement will be at 10 o'clock. Usually by the time we're wrapped up with that and done, it's 11:30. We'll have lunch there for you to eat. And then at 1 o'clock, we start with the nursing pinning ceremony. That has been about an hour, but I've sat through some that have gone closer to 2 on occasion, but they've been really pretty expeditious lately. So that'll get us to 2. You're probably back at 2:30, and then at 3 o'clock, we'll have the high school equivalency celebration, and that's usually done by 4 o'clock. So we'll have nourishment for you to keep you going throughout the day. You're welcome to hang out with us for the entire day, but it's going to be wonderful. Cool, hopefully not too much rain, but cool, which is always nice if you're wearing robes. So we'll take that weather.
Are you excuse me, Mr. Chair, are you able at this time to announce the number of certificates and degrees that are going to be provided
Mr. Chairman, Trustee Erickson, I would love to, but every time I start to say numbers, our registrar tells me not to say numbers. Here's what I can tell you, I think, and where's Vice President? Hey, tell me if I get off course. We think we're on the track to have a record number of students walking. More students going through commencement than we've ever had. Part of that is because of the changes we made to the application process, we think. So it's far more automated, easy to navigate. There's no fee to apply for graduation anymore, lots of things. And so I do know that we anticipate a record number of students walking across the stage. What I can tell you is the last numbers that I saw is we're close to where we were last year, which is about 800. And that would put us again on that trajectory to this be one of the top 5, years of graduate number of credentials. I do know that there are some exciting things. I don't want to take time, but we'll actually award 12 credentials to Rediscover LCCC students in the first
Awesome.
year.
That's
So when you think about that, so I want to say it's like 8 graduates. I don't know if I have the number right, but well, it doesn't sound like a lot for a program where many of them are in 2-year degree programs. We have 10% of the students that are in this cohort who already have earned a credential. So that was really pretty exciting. The other thing that really surprised me, Judy, correct me if I'm wrong, 95% of our graduates have Wyoming addresses. So you want to talk about the impact of building Wyoming's workforce, now that's their address where we're going to mail their diploma. Some of those will be people that came here and now are hopefully staying, but 95%. So when you think about actually developing Laramie County's workforce, but Wyoming's workforce, pretty neat to think about what we're doing, so that's 95% of roughly 800 credentials are right here in Wyoming.
It's great.
Yeah, good. So exciting stuff with that. One last thing to put on your radar. It's hard to be talking about August, but I want to talk about August. August has typically been your month to do a retreat. And so I just want you guys to start getting the juices flowing and tell me, one, do you want to hold a retreat in August as you've done in the past? I'm assuming that you do. And then 2, if there's a specific area of focus or specific things you would like to do in that retreat, I can start working on some of those details. And, I have some suggestions, and one of them I would like to entertain still is bringing in 1 or 2 trustees from other institutions across the nation that have really demonstrated success as governing boards guiding excellence in their organizations so that you can actually interact with some of those folks. But, at this point, I completely open in how you want to do that. So just start thinking about it, chewing on it, and, maybe at their next meeting, we can have some conversations about specifically what you want to talk about. And that, Mr. Chairman, concludes my report. Happy to answer any questions.
I have a
Trustee Little.
question. There's starting this fall, I'm going to be serving as the AACT Wyoming representative. So I did you say you might be bringing in some other trustees or what did you say again, Joe, that you were thinking about bringing in?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Trustee Little, specifically, there's been a couple of trustees, one of them in particular that is actually the ACCT representative on the AACC board. He's a trustee at the Alamo Colleges, and they were the one that just received the Baldridge Excellence Award. An institution, well, San Antonio is very different than Cheyenne, Wyoming, an institution that has gone through very similar transformation to us, it would be the Alamo Colleges, what they did. And so he's expressed interest, and I've kind of nudged him to see if he would come in and share some of specifically the trustees' role in helping that transition along through some pretty tenuous times there. I mean, there was a point early on where, their president received a vote of no confidence from the faculty, and the board saw where it was coming from and what it was for, and they gave him a raise and actually extended his contract. And so that's how tight it was in the beginning. And then to go from there to actually being, I think, only the 3rd community college in the nation to ever receive the Baldridge Awards for excellence. Pretty impressive. So that's the type of folk I would want to bring in. But if there was another one that could come in and
No, that helps me a lot. So that doesn't really fit into what I was thinking. So thank you. I'll take my thoughts a different direction because that helps me know that what the path I was going on is not the same. But I like that idea.
Oh, okay.
But the path I'm going on, I'll bring up later.
Okay.
In the year,
Okay,
not tonight.
all right. Now we're back on the work items. It's our budget first reading. President Schaefer again and Vice President Johnson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, since I think this will be, not to get sappy or anything, this will be Vice President Johnson's last budget that he's going to report to us. I'm going to make him do all the work.
Seems fair.
And one of the few times where I will say you don't have to work through me if you want to task him with a bunch of things to get done over the next few weeks or something, so. No, Mr. Chairman,
Did
members of the
Rick
board.
then write your budget presentation?
I should have made him write the budget letter. I did think about that, yeah. So, but we're going to tag team a little bit, but Vice President Johnson and of course, Budget Director Jane Myrick have done the majority of the work on this effort. And so we'll let them present and then give them the kudos for what they pulled together. So Rick?
I think we're really pleased that this year, so this is my fourth one, this year, I think was one of the smoothest budget processes that we've experienced. Of course, a few years ago, we had the difficulties with the cuts and all of that. But this one just came together in a lot of magical ways. I thought the right things happened at the right times. And so I'm pleased to be able to present our balanced budget at this meeting and get your feedback and hopefully move on to the second reading. Here. I first got to start with thank yous, which I always do, and I got to start with Jane.
Sorry.
Every time I go through this budget process here at college, just every time I just get this pause about it is the most methodical, structured in a good way, collaborative budget process I've ever experienced. And even yet this fourth time, I was asking Jane, she didn't even know why I was asking questions. Some of these templates that are used in the background year over year, they have a real purpose behind them that delivers a real smooth outcome. And if you don't live it, you don't probably experience it, but it's amazing. And there's an enormous amount of credit that goes to Jane. She worked so diligently behind the scenes.
Thank you.
I'm very thankful. As I did last year, we've got the budget process advisory committee. Each of the members just go around, they meet in the fall, they relook at process, they help us improve it along the way. A lot of them work easier. And then we have the budget resource allocation committee and participants this year, and they worked so hard, look at the trend data and diligently making recommendations for the cabinet and the president to consider for raising good, hard questions. And these are elements that you just don't see in other budget processes, at least my 34 years of that. It's just remarkable work and remarkable transformation that this college made some years ago based on what I've learned. It is, I can speak to it all day. So I'm just going to hit off the top with some of the economic stuff that I've done in the past and reacquaint you because, we're so tied to what happens in the economy around the state, the energy sector and so forth. It's really interesting to look at it and then see where we're at and where we're going. These are gas prices, these are oil prices, and these are coal prices. And you remember in 2016, we had the big inflation and the cuts, and I couldn't display all the way back to 16. But we came out of 16 with oil price or gas prices rising 70%. I had lost track of that big bump. It was quite amazing. But then in 18, we lost ground by 14%. But here in 19, we're up 57. So there's a lot of gyration there, but that's really good news, I think, for what we'll develop. Oil prices, and I'm going to get to oil production, it's a very interesting story, but we're up, and of course prices now are down a little, not substantially, but prices are down. It's the opposite story with production, and I'll show you that in a moment. Coal, 16, was bad. There was some recovery. I don't remember why. A little bit more recovery, and then now 3% decline, and everything I can read on the subject, it's going to disappear. So, but that's where we've been and where we're at with prices. So we get to production, and this is natural gas, this is oil, and that's coal. And if you follow the same thing, we came out of that bad 16, gas production down, then up a little, and now a big down. I'm not certain I fully understand what's going on in the natural gas, but we know what's going on in oil production. We came out of 16 down, and then a big up and a big up. And oil production is looking really good. There's a lot of activity in the Powder River Basin. There was a news story a few months ago of 3,500 permits filed. I know that doesn't equate to 3,500 trades, but remarkable data. I find it interesting that oil prices have been down or leveled off, kind of hovering in that mid-50s, but production's gone up. So how wonderful would that be if oil prices could rise while production's rising? And the rewards that we're able to reap from it. And of course, coal production, we bumped up after that big setback, then we're down, and then we're down some more, so we all know where that's going. A little bit more on oil, your big gray block here, oil and gas jobs, so they've been coming up around the state. But look at the rig count. Back when we had our big cuts, I think we had 3 oil rigs, if I remember that right.
That's correct.
Operation. Now we have 36, at least at the point this was taken. That's a factor of 10 in 4 years or less. So for now, things are looking good there. We're like a mini West Texas. Statewide sales and use taxes by county. Always interesting to look at because Sweetwater, Natrona, and Fremont are the energy producing sectors that really matter to us, their districts, I mean, because it matters so much to local valuations and recapture and distribution process. You see here that last year Fremont was up 4 and they declined. Natrona was up 11 last year and now up 12 on top of that. Sweetwater was up 9 and up almost 6. Laramie County, interestingly, we got a nice 13% gain last year, and then we matched that again this year. And we'll see on another slide what this means over the whole state. This is looking at the same data by industry. If there's bars running this way, it's negative, and if they're running that way, it's positive. So you see these percent changes. Mining up 22%. Which I thought was remarkable, and of course financial activities up 23. The really important thing on this slide, I think, though, that statewide up 11.8%. So that's really good for the economy across the state. Severance taxes, and remember severance taxes are on non-renewable resources, oil, gas, coal, stuff like that. Here now we've crossed the 5-year average and climbing up 12%. That, I guess, is probably tied to the rise in oil production, certainly not coal or gas, but a good trend now going forward. This slide has a variety of information. I'll call out a few things. This is economy metrics for Wyoming, Casper, and Cheyenne. So this column's Wyoming, that's Casper, that's Cheyenne. First, point out labor force. This little diamond means there was 0% up or down. So in Wyoming, labor force has remained static. Then it jumped up a bit in Casper, but in Cheyenne, it's even. And we see the effects of that in the dining center. Sodexo trying to find help, have people. We see it around town, signs in restaurants, looking for help. This is very interesting. Single-family building permits are down statewide and down in Casper, but look at Cheyenne, 53%.
Oh my gosh.
increase
That's over what period of time?
year over year, March to March, I
Okay.
believe. Maybe April. But, of course, we're looking for a lot of green, and that's what we're seeing. And, so it's good. I do happen to know, reading some other information, that multifamily building permits in Cheyenne are up as well. Yeah. As well, and I think down in Casper. So, economic wrap-up of all that you just saw, oil production's rising, the state economy continues to grow in some good ways. Local valuations, which matter so much, are fairly strong around the state. We're still waiting for the payback in some of the other counties where we've shifted money over there. The colleges right now are reporting to the commission mostly even valuations or slightly up. And that's not hard data, and they're probably hedging a little bit. Our county, on the other hand, will point out, a year ago, Don and I and Matt Petrie went to the assessor and tried to develop a way that they could report for us that gave us better data. And they responded. And so what I know right now for Laramie County, Joe was telling me this is showing up in county commissioner stuff and whatnot. A year ago, valuations in Laramie County were about 1.69 billion. And this year, it might top 2 billion. 14%. And that's per the assessor, and that's his estimate right now. Of course, we'll wait for the finals as they come in, and right, the 1st of July. But it's remarkable here.
Rick, could you go back to the other slide? Okay, you're saying Cheyenne is up 53% on building permits. Is that within the city limits or is that Laramie County?
I think it's,
Because there's so much going on outside of the city limits
yeah,
in building as well.
yeah.
But it doesn't make any difference. We're Laramie County.
This is all really good stuff in the future. Perhaps a year from now, a lot of this growth is going to get caught up in the other counties, and we're going to see some money come our way maybe that in the past we haven't seen. Legislature, there's a few things that came out of there that relevant to the budget. First of all, you know this, but just to remind you, we always had this threshold of $1 million. If we had a project that exceeded it, we had to get legislative approval. That got changed to $1.5 million, and that's why the business facade project is kicking off now. Because that was effective immediately. That was long overdue, and the people that put work into getting that changed did really good work. We now get major maintenance paid to us quarterly. What used to happen is we get our allocation annually. So we get our allocation, and then we could just take off fixing things. Now we get quarterly, which causing us a delay in being able to get this stuff done. After about a year, this will reset itself. This was an element of a bill that we actually didn't favor, but it is what it is. It, by the way, is effective immediately, I believe. It was passed. The State Construction Management Division hasn't quite yet worked out the mechanics of it. They're working on that. And so we're still kind of hovering on that first quarter. And so we're holding projects back until we have the money. We've always had a threshold, it's been for many years, I don't know how many, but our current fund underspend can exceed a certain threshold, and that's 8% of the total fund. That got changed to 12, which is very helpful. I know years ago, the school experienced times when we were about this time of year perhaps, and we were hitting the threshold or going to exceed the 8. And so then we're spending rapidly without good planning, and having that go to 12 will help us. We're not approaching that number, so it's not a problem for us to overcome that. That was a good piece. And then, of course, you're going to hear more about this, but the 2% state raise, just to set the table there, we receive 62% of that funding from the state. We don't receive 100%, about 62, 61%. So those were kind of the highlights from the legislature that are relevant to the budget process. So these are the key drivers that you're going to see embedded in the presentation. So we have the tuition cap move going from 12 to 15. That's a good thing, but there's a little anxiety around it. We'll get to tuition increase by the commission, which I think was 5.3%. Commission?
$94 to $99 credit for the residents, so whatever that proportion is. He's probably right.
Fee revenue increase due to cap move. A piece of information we just got in the last 2 weeks, which was a big bump, which you're going to see in our completion funding from the state. Many of the colleges did receive a bump, a nice bump. And that came at a really opportune time in our process, didn't it?
Mr. Chairman, Rick, just for the new trustees, so that is part of the commission's continued rollout of their performance funding component of the model, where they're putting more and more funding on the variable side of our funds to institutions that are performing on certain student metrics. So course success rates, number of credentials, completions, things like that. And while they've put more money into it, and that created an increase for all the campuses, ours is significant, and it's a result of the good work the institution is doing around student outcomes. And so that's that performance funding component, and it's benefiting us.
This is probably the first notable time that metric has been for us, right?
Significantly like it is this year, yeah, yes.
Downside, recapture redistribution last August. This is that process where the commission looks at local valuations, it all gets put into the sausage machine, and then state aid is adjusted to balance it out around the state. And so when we're up and everybody's down, we lose state aid that goes to others. And we took a pretty substantial hit last August that plays out now. So now I'll get to the mic and we'll begin the budget part. I should point out the budget book we have, the yellow one there, just because I'm recalling a question that came up last year, that the budget book can be, if you're new to it, can be a little bit chunky to this, like, it's not like a book you might read from front to back. And as you get into it, information is displayed in ways that may be confusing. And I just want to remind everybody, this is a budget book framework that the commission requires of all the colleges so that it's uniform, so that they can do what they do and have the same sets of information. You'll notice at the very top right-hand corner, am I on that slide? Remember what I left this? Yeah. In blue, on this page in particular, it says board book, page 12. Each of my slides, and I'll try to call it out. If you want to try to follow in the budget book, you can refer to the blue page number in the top right-hand corner of my slides. This slide is what we call estimated funds available. It's what I call the puts and takes of the college, meaning if we're getting new money, it's a put, and if we're losing some money, it's a take. So what you see in red is a take, and what you see in black is a put. So starting off there, you see state aid with the big red number of $984,000 pullback. That's the recapture redistribution from last August that I spoke to a moment ago. If you go down a row, you'll see local appropriation. That's up just about the same amount. I mean, it's almost a wash. That's the beauty of what we have going on here. It's balancing out some of this for us. Then we have our actual state aid with our completion funding that Joe was just speaking about, where we went up $775,000, and that was the great little nugget that we received, just in the last 2 weeks. So that was wonderful to get. Prior to that, we didn't have that piece, and we were still struggling through this budget, working on how we were going to structure it. Next in line is the state aid salary appropriation. This is the 2% salary raise where the state gives us about 62% of what we need. And so that's 330,000. So that's a put for us. We got this little bit in business training tuition uptick. Then you see tuition. So this is a combination of the tuition increase and the cap release. And we have that estimated at an $800,000 gain. This is not a hard and fast number. There's been a lot of effort spent by Jane, by IR, by all of us collectively trying to figure out through a good methodical way, what can we plan in the budget for what this is going to bring us? And we've had estimates as high as $1 million. We've had those days when our thinking was soured and we had something less than 800,000, but we finally, through all the analysis, decided that 800 would be a good number to roll with at this point. What's challenging about this piece is we don't know, there's a lot of math behind it, but we don't know what the student behavior will be. That's yet to be experienced. But we think we've accounted for some change in behavior that would impact us, hence down to 800,000. Then we get course fees. We've had some approved course fee increases. That's the 28,300. And then due to the cap release, athletic fee revenue has gone up 33,000. So that's our external new funds or takes. Most of them are puts, totaling 1.9 million. Then we get to the internal puts and takes. So we have vacancies and replacements. This is where we see a put of 44,000. This might be where somebody was making X and we hired their replacement at something less than X. And so we pick up a little and so forth. Then this next row, anticipated positions. This is money actually that we had budgeted last year. If you go back and look at your documents, you'll see this number. We thought we might spend it. We didn't. So we've rolled it forward. So it's a put in this coming fiscal year. And that's the same for the next row. The last row, performance incentives. Joe had set aside this 30,000. We're rolling that forward as well. So when you total all that together, we've got 2.1 million. That's the number in the far bottom right. That is kind of new to our picture to distribute across our budget and use strategically. So I'm going to turn this one over to Joe.
Yeah, thank you, Rick, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. So Rick's given you sort of that external perspective and where we're sitting this year in terms of revenue that essentially can be strategically allocated. He's going to go into the details of how we're proposing to do a lot of that. But I want to just set the stage as he gets in so that there's a few things always in the back of your mind as you're hearing some of the details and you could connect them. There's essentially four major themes that really are driving this budget, the FY20 budget. The first one isn't a surprise to anybody, I don't think, and it's that investment in our people. This year, we've made two commitments, I would say. The first one formally and unequivocally, the second one with the best of intentions, but contingent on the legislature. The first was that we continue to implement and phase in the LCCC market-based compensation model. And as you know, that's been a big lift for us for the last 2 years. This year, you'll see it's again a very big lift where we're getting all of our employees at least to the 25th percentile on their market range. And so this is what we call phase 2B. Phase 1 was getting anybody below the minimum to the minimum. Phase 2A was moving them halfway to the 25th percentile. Phase 2B is moving everybody to the 25th percentile. And as you recall, that's our starting metric for every employee in the future, which will differentiate employment at LCCC from arguably any other comparator in the region. That's one. The other one we made that isn't as unequivocal was recognizing that we needed to do something from an inflationary perspective across the nation. You know, last year wages were up 3.9%. They're anticipated to be up 5 or 6%. Wage growth is happening in a stressed workforce environment. it's making it very hard to retain employees. So we went into the legislative session wanting a cost of living adjustment. In fact, at that time, the numbers we could suggest were actually between 6% and 8%. At the end of the day, what we got was a modified raise, which was 2%, but only up to the first $80,000 and some convoluted ways for doing that. That didn't get us to the cost of living adjustment, which means implementing that here with our model is incredibly complicated and complex. We'll go into that as you have questions. Long story short, we said we need to find a way to invest that inflationary adjustment, that cost of living adjustment for all employees. Especially those who maybe have been above the 25th percentile in their rates, but have essentially been stagnant for the last 4 years and haven't moved at all while we've had true inflationary pressures. And so first thing is those two pieces, and then some market adjustments that I'm sure Rick will talk about there, but continuing that investment in our people. It is an important investment. You're seeing what you're getting from them during dinner, and you're seeing it show up in those things. But we need to continue to do that. Second one, no surprise, guided pathways. You will see investments and things that help us advance guided pathways. The third theme was really holding our operating expenses, or actually holding them down. You will see that that's playing out, but we realize our operating expenses still have some efficiencies to be gained across all those units. And our perspective is that if we're too lax or too I was going to say sloppy. Sloppy is not the right word. Whatever the opposite of laser-like would be, ambiguous. We're essentially, by putting resources in the budget into operating expenses that we may or may not use, we're locking up resources that could be strategically invested elsewhere. And so we said, let's really tighten our operating expenses so that we have those resources available. And then the last theme is just buffering for the future, either for future investments or some uncertainties around things like health insurance. So as Rick goes through, keep those four things in the back of your mind, and you should see how they've played out through the entirety of the general fund and certainly on the 1 mil fund. So.
Okay, just to reset the table so I don't lose anybody, go back a slide. So that bottom right-hand figure of 2.1 million is the money that we have to strategically invest across the college. So you've seen this before. We call it the proposed distribution. This is 2 pages of slides. You'll find this in your board book on page 13 as a 1 page if you want to look there. We start with compensation. You see the compensation study phase 2B. This is the second phase of getting everybody to 25%. So that's an investment of $750,000. Very worthwhile investment. Then we have the 2% COLA that is adding on to the top of that for all employees, and so that's 474. And then we encountered the fact that in trades and IT, we were out of line with market. And so there were some adjustments made through human resources, and that is a total cost of $107,000. Then we have market adjustments for $12,497. That's just kind of ongoing things that shift over time. And then you see performance incentives for $30,000. This is that roll forward piece that I mentioned before. Then we move on to the retirement contribution that we have to make with changes in the system, costing us $18,000. And then every year we always have educational advancements because we have a policy structure that allows for that, for employees to advance their salary, certain classes of employees, and so that's $45,000. Then we get into each particular division across the college. So academic affairs here, you see an investment in a health sciences pathways coordinator. So salary and benefits all in, that's $103,000. Then you get into the operating side of academic affairs, and you see an operating budget reduction of $89,000. This is getting back to what Joe was just mentioning, where we asked people to try to tighten their budgets and get down to what really matters strategically. Business training, there's that $5,000 that you saw in an earlier previous slide. Course fee increase, which you saw in a previous slide. So academic affairs as a division is up $47,338. So Then we move to student services, where we're going to hire 2 academic advisors. This ties specifically to pathways and the implementation there. There may be even 2 more next year, depending on how the budget rolls out. So that's an investment of 114. Then on the operating side, you see a slight increase in student services operating budget of 21,000, and some of that relates to the athletic fee revenue increase from the change I mentioned earlier. Scholarships going up 125,000. We're not adding on new scholarships. This is an adjustment for the increases that we've been talking about. President's office is up 33,000. Albany County campus, down 80,000 on their operating budget. So they worked very diligently to see what they could do with their budget. IE came down, they were able to come down. Oh, I didn't get, sorry about that. If you were following in the board book, you were with me. IE down $2,300. IA came in pretty flat, just as we needed. And then we're adding a campus safety officer, and you see an increase there of 54,271, but it's actually a net cost of about 12,000. And the reason for that is, if you look at the row below, you see the operating budget where there's a minus 42,000. Campus safety always had a very healthy part-time employee budget, 42,000, but we could never find people willing to work that could show up on their given schedules, help us with the critical times of breaks and holidays, and it was becoming very problematic. So we proposed to take that operating budget of 42, roll it over into a full-time position, and fund it at a net additional cost of about $11,700. So that's going to be wonderful for the campus to have another full-time safety officer on campus.
May I ask a question?
Please.
I don't see anything for benefits for that position. Is this
I'm
a
sorry, Don, I
contract?
couldn't hear
I
quite.
don't see any benefits for this position. Is that a contract, self-employment type person?
That includes benefits.
It does include benefits.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And then the last row here on distribution, you see a net excess of $437,000, what we're calling operating reserve. And on that point, I'm going to turn it back over to Joe.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. So this is something, and if you read my budget memo, I described it in there, that this operating reserve is part of that buffering for the future, and it'll serve possibly 3 purposes. The first, as I mentioned in the past, there is the fear of the deficit in health insurance funding. And we've modeled that anywhere from as much as 500 or just under 500,000, as much as 800,000. It's a moving target because it ultimately will be dependent on the types of policies employees have. We hope and we believe that will be resolved, but there is that worry that if we don't have that backfilled, there'll be a deficit. So it's there to help us maybe with health insurance. If health insurance is addressed for this biennium, and certainly as we were to fix it going forward, there is still an undercurrent among some legislators that the community colleges did not take the entirety of their cuts that they should have taken. So state revenue be damned, we may have to take those cuts because fair is fair and we should have taken those cuts. In the event that we have to take additional cuts, it'll hit next biennium, but this provides some buffer in the budget so that we could actually absorb a portion of those if that were to be the case, assuming revenue stays similar. Hopefully neither of those happen. And then the third thing that this does is it actually creates room in our next year's fiscal budget for the next biennium to actually make strategic investments in things we know are going to come up. We anticipate there will be additional investments necessary for pathways. And so we feel better about having this buffer in as an operating reserve here up front, knowing that it at least gives us some ability to navigate those pieces that may come up and hopefully position us well as we go into next biennium.
Hey, Rick, I just have a question on why do we only get 62% of the 2% funding?
I don't know.
Yeah. So Mr. Chairman, historically, the legislature has only funded the proportion of certain types of appropriations equivalent to the proportion of state funding to total funding for the community colleges. I should say state funding to local funding for the community colleges. And so historically, when you would look at local or state funding, proportionately, the state has kicked in about 60%. The local funds would be, I want to say the other 40, but it's really with local and tuition. What's interesting is we got 62% in this case, but I think our state funding for this year actually is only going to be about 50%. But that's the system average. So in some cases, like Eastern Wyoming College, the proportion of their funding that comes from state is actually substantially higher than 60%. So the average across the 7 colleges is 62 point something percent. And they say, we'll do a 2%, but you're only getting 61% of that because that's what the state share is of it. So every time they do something like that, we automatically have to bring in additional resources to do it. So that's the proportion of state funding to total funding for all the community colleges, and that's how they then apply what type of appropriation they'll get for things like employee raises.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes,
I have
sorry.
another question.
Trustee Soto.
I'm curious about the academic affairs and Albany County campus, the operating budget, sort of where they found those kinds of savings. I mean, I don't need anything specific, but just some ideas about that.
I could take that and then Clark maybe jump in. So, Mr. Chairman, Trustee Soto, one of the things that we're trying to do, as we've been doing within academic affairs, when we have large faculty numbers, is really look at strategic budgeting for adjuncts. So a lot of the savings has come from reducing the adjunct budgets. And so this is, again, one of those areas where historically every school, the Albany County campus, even at the vice president's office, we would keep either adjunct reserves or we would budget for anticipated part-time faculty. And so we've been tracking through the budget process the actual spend rate of that. And what we're finding is we're just not hiring as many as we need, but yet people want to, and it makes sense. They want to say, but what if, what if enrollment goes up? What if I need to open another section? This is one of those areas where we've said, and Jane and I have talked, if enrollment goes up and we need another section, we will have additional tuition revenue to do budget amendments and add that back in. So this is trying to consolidate a lot of those adjunct budgets, really get them accurate. Because again, if we over budget and don't expend, we're locking up resources for other things. And there was a few other pooled areas that we looked at in here. Furniture was actually one that was kind of spread. Everybody was sort of budgeting for furniture and things like that. And so that's where I think the majority of it came from. And I'm thinking Clark Brady, what am I missing? There was
primary. I said most of what you see there is from those areas.
Yeah.
And really just more accurate projection of what the numbers are. So then across the board, it's just tighter on what we're actually delivering. And just sort of, I think over a period of time, rectifying what has just sort of carried over and making sure it's on the money, so to speak.
Okay, thank you.
I think the adjunct is an important place. Also, we just tried to tighten our belts. And one thing I've tried to get the deans to do is to not put money into like each program for professional development, but if they can hold that more at their level or for furniture or things, then we don't have extra laying out there, because if they can hold it a little bit at their level, then we hopefully will be closer. And so we've looked at our 3-year averages, and I think we made some really good decisions, because the deans, they all go through in all my reports, and then they'll get it back to me, and then we'll kind of make this analysis.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I just have a basic question. So when you're talking about all employees getting the 25%, does that include adjunct too? Or is that just all full-time employees?
All full-time.
Yep, Mr. Chairman, Trustee Thompson, adjunct currently receive a flat rate per credit for their compensation. And I know that's something that we will, in fact, not just adjunct, but all part-time staff is sort of the next phase. We're phasing this in, and then we're going to start looking at those to make sure we're aligned where we need as well. Yeah.
Thank you, that's what I'd like to see.
Okay, so the total there that you see in the bottom right hand is that 2.1 million that you saw on the previous slide, so fully accounted for. So we move on to 1 mil. I'm just going to walk down this because there's some important points I think to be made. Starting off with the very top, you see that the first row of subtotal, we're up 128,000 from last year to this year. This is part of the valuation growth in Laramie County. So going from 1.763 million to 1.892 million. By the way, board book, this is page 21. You'll get a headache trying to follow along with me on that page or pages, but it's there if you want to look at it.
Actually, Rick, I don't think it is page 21.
It's in the 1 mil, just go to the 1 mil tab.
Yeah,
Yeah.
18, page 18.
But it's the same numbers you thought.
Yeah,
Just this first page. So it's page 18.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, page 21, what you get is the 1 mil summary
I see, there it
in
is,
the state
21.
format, which is different than what we're showing you here because this is more explanatory. Okay, so up 128,000, that's really great news. It looks like this continues to rise. We've been seeing this in the, as this academic year has been going along, as we've been seeing the actuals on our mill levy election, which is also 1 mil. So we're seeing how that growth is pushing through. So this is all very good news for us. We get then into the first expense block. These are the expenses that we typically are largely obligated to cover here on the 1 mil. Our support of Eastern Laramie County, professional development funds that we always allocate for use around campus, equipment repairs and replacement, just so when things break and whatnot, we have a source to take care of them. IT you see on here, I should just point out, because I know this was a question that came up last year. For those of you who've been around a while, IT's been on and off the 1 mil. As a matter of fact, in 16 they were on the current fund. In 17 they were on the 1 mil. In 18 they were on the current fund. 19 1 mil, 21 mil. Don't ask me about next year. I don't know where they'll land. And then college insurance, you see an increase there from 440 to 475. This is anticipating that we may have some premium increases. If we do, I don't know what they are at the moment. This is usually a June kind of cycle. And but by the time we get to second reading, we should know. And then we can dial this in. We have had, if we have one area of risk right now on insurance for premium increases, it's in one of two places, workers' comp, where we've had a fair amount of activity, I'd say. And then Hartford, who is our property insurer, because of all the hail damage in Cheyenne, came back to us with a ridiculous suggestion that requiring us to place if I get this right, a $50,000 deductible on every single building. With that kind of money, we could self-insure ourselves for hail, I think. But so we rejected that, and we're actually we're shopping the property insurance in the marketplace to see if we can have a better outcome. So more to follow on that. But that's why you see an increase there. It's a kind of a placeholder at the moment. Then we get down to the section, and please interrupt me if you have questions, by the way. Remaining amount to budget. Small maintenance projects. This is where often you'll hear me or others say minor maintenance. We've historically kind of funded that in the realm of $500,000 a year. But because of the compensation plan and other things we're doing, we can't. So that's why it's down at 125. And we think we're going to be okay. We've got some carry forward that will go in addition to this once we get through year-end close. And with what we have planned in minor maintenance, we're going to be able to tackle the key things that we think we need to tackle. So we're feeling okay about it. And I'm speaking for plant as well, and they've been integrated in that discussion. Next row is one-time requests and innovation requests. So we allocated $246,000. This is wonderful because you may remember, a few years ago, we had nothing to allocate in this realm. And so we've covered on one-time radiography equipment, some IR software, nursing equipment, 2 new fleet vehicles to add to our aging fleet, a new snowplow, which we really needed badly, some upgrades to the CCI building to make it more aesthetically pleasing for those that rent it and use it, and then an ag truck replacement. So these were really good investments that came out on the high priority of the process to allocate those requests. And then on the innovation fund request side, we have the EMSI Career Coach, a chatbot service for students. And I'm still coming up to speed on these chatbots, but you call in and talk to the chatbot, and
Those are the 2 things you heard them present at your dinner that they're looking, so, yeah.
tactile learning environment, and some investment in employee wellness program that we're just getting ready to kick off, or we have kicked off. So that's some really nice investments that we're able to make at this point. And frankly, it's kind of surprising, you know, with all the pressure on the compensation plan and whatnot, that this is working out this way. Then you see 77,000 for guided pathways. This ties back to what Joe was kind of setting the table about. Some investment in the gen ed space that will kick off this summer and be largely spent out by fall, right? I believe. And then that's it for expenditures on 1 mil. It looks to be in good shape.
The ag master plan.
Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped over that one. Yeah, facilities planning for 112,000. So we put an RFP on the street to find a suitable party to help us develop an ag master plan for that whole north side, from the arena to the ag facilities to the outdoor arena. This is a part of campus that could use some rethinking, it could use some investment, it could use some more strategic maybe way of looking at how we take care of that infrastructure and how we plan for it in the future. So those bids came back. The vendor that was selected, the price was $112,000, and so we're able to fully fund it. And so once we get to an approval step, we will award that contract and begin that work to develop the ag master plan, and that will be a very worthwhile endeavor, I think. There's a lot of excitement on the north side of campus for this now coming to be. Thank you for pointing out that I missed that. Any questions on 1 mil? Now we get to the pie charts. This is always the fun part because you can kind of get lost looking at these things. So what I'll try to do is just hit what I think are the highlights. So this is our revenue comparison year over year, 18 on the left, 19 on the left, FY20 on the right. Board book, page 8. First call out here, if you look at the state aid comparison, and you can just look on the pie chart, if you look right here, you see state appropriation was 54.5% of our budget last year. And then look over on the right where I'm circling the mouse, it's down a little. I was remarking to Joe that I think only 4 years ago, this number was around 61% maybe of our total piece of the pie. So that's just steadily eroding. It's still quite a good number by comparison to other states, but every state is feeling this pressure. You'll see the local over here on this part of the pie chart at 14.72, and over here in the coming year at 16.6. So that's that increase in the valuations and what we're getting. And then if you study this, you'll see the increase in tuition and fees that is rolling through with the tuition increase and the cap and all of that. I also should point out, if you try to tie the numbers you see in these pie charts to the previous information you've seen or other stuff in your book, this is not just the current fund. In this format with their budget book, this is the combination of the current fund and the 1 mil, which we call the operating fund. This gets confusing sometimes. Going forward, page 9, your board book, you see expenditures by program. questions come up in the past, why these programs? These are standard higher ed, NACUBO-based structure of delineating programs. Callouts here that I think are important to see is if you see instruction, student services, and academic support are all up dramatically. Instruction's up $1 million. That's largely due to the wage increases coming through with the compensation plan. I'll point out the student services section, which is up $300,000 year over year. That's mostly wages, but it's also those 2 advisors that we're hiring and putting in place. Lastly, here on this set of pie charts is you see the decrease in minor maintenance. If you look in here, it shows up in the plant operations piece. This is what you saw in the 1 mil where we pulling that back to $125,000 a year. Flipping to page 10 in the board book, you see the same expenditures but by series. Series being salary, benefits, operating expenses, capital outlay. The takeaway here is look at the, if you look at the screen, these 2 numbers here last year total about 70%. And if you look at this year, these 2 numbers that I'm circling total about 73%. This is that investment in people that Joe was talking about, the compensation plan implementation. So here we sit with 73% of our operating funds going to our human resource that services the college. And that's remarkable and expected and a really good investment.
Miss,
I'm sorry,
go ahead.
Mr. Chairman.
Trustee Little.
Rick, what's capital outlay and why is it reduced so much?
First of all, in the previous year, there's carryover in there. And then in this current year, it's just accounting for one-time expenditures that I was talking about earlier.
Oh, that's those one time.
Yeah, and then STIF and TIF, these are our technology funds that we use to update our technology infrastructure.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, and I don't know, Jane, would you have anything to add to that?
Well, the minor maintenance.
Oh, that's playing through there.
In the prior year, okay.
The
thank
the
you.
commission structure with the budget book, it's kind of an odd category, capital outlay, because you're thinking, oh, I might see these projects.
Right,
And
what
that's
I
not
thought.
where you'll see that there.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I was just going to make a point, and just, one of those things to put in the back of your mind again. So while Rick pointed out, it is incredibly wonderful that we have 73% of our entire budget wrapped up in our people, which is appropriate. If we don't see a change in revenue over the future, increases in that revenue, what that means is when we try to do very strategic things that would have to require significant investments, new programming, significant investments here, what it means is we have to start impacting people because only 1/4 of our budget is in that operating expense. And again, why we're trying to really make sure that's as tight as possible so that we don't have to impact people. But in the future, if the revenue environment stays flat and we want to do new things, it means we have to stop doing other things. And there's a 73% chance if we stop doing something, we're going to impact people. And so it's just the nature of our work when so much of our revenue, our budget is invested in the human resources, that when you want to reallocate, it's going to impact humans. And I don't foresee that this year. We're going to probably be more judicious about perhaps grabbing positions as they come open to think about those investments. It's that one. You saw that early on, we carried and sort of grabbed a position last year, about 120,000. We'll do that. But as you think about the future and doing major strategic investments, if that revenue picture doesn't change, say there's a 73% chance we'll have to impact people to be able to invest in new things. And so it's just something to keep in the back of your mind about the operating design of higher education.
Thank you.
On page 8, can I go back to page 8 for a minute? The state appropriation of 54.31% or $25,538,000. Does that include the fixed dollars that go to benefits? that we have no control of, that has to go directly to benefits? Is that included within the 25 million?
Mr. Chairman, Trustee Erickson, I'll look at Jane, but I believe it is, since that is provided by the state. So health insurance reimbursement, yeah.
So that's included that. So the bottom line where I'm coming here then is that although we get 54.31% in state appropriation, some of that is fixed and it's not truly available for our operating funds. If I understand.
Correct.
That, okay.
Yep, correct. And therein lies the challenge with the choice of the commission to use health insurance funding for basically operating reductions across the board. Is we've taken essentially a restricted revenue source, used it for variable unrestricted things, and now we're kind of in that catch-22 where we have to go back to the unrestricted funds to be able to reconcile that. Or
And
we
for
have
the
to-
record, we were not one of those colleges that did that.
For the record, we were not the one that has significantly added back policies to that, correct? I would agree with that. But it impacted, that choice impacted all the colleges, I would say.
Good statement.
Because it's billed quarterly for actual positions of each college.
Yep.
So it's not, we don't get that $10 million blanketed amount.
I will say, Mr. Chairman, I mean, it's a fair point. We've had this conversation when, so when we, even with the money to invest in those new advisors for pathways, converting those part-time to one full-time officer, those will likely add 3 policies, 4 with the health science pathway person, 4 policies to our number. So it could look like our positions or our policies have now increased, as they will. And I do worry about how will that be read? Again, I'm unclear of, especially MIDI, but certainly legislative leadership, is the expectation that employees from now until the undefined future, numbers will always be the same or actually go down, or should we be actually investing in growing where it need be? And so there's not a lot of clarity on how people are perceiving that. I think there's that underlying expectation or impression that we should be at pre-2016 cut numbers of employees and should not grow at all. And yet at the same time, help with economic diversification, implement new programs to fulfill Wyoming Works, work on the higher ed attainment. I mean, so, you hear about when mom and dad send mixed messages to their kids and you confuse them. I feel like we're getting mixed messages, and I'm not sure how that will impact us, but just know as we go forward, we've just added, by adding these, 4 policies potentially.
But, Mr. Chairman,
Yeah,
if I
just a
might,
little.
but Joe, I think there's a political defense for all of the positions that we are adding. I mean, I think they're politically defensible. If you talk about campus security and you talk about pathways.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that it's, even with the conservative legislature, I think. Jess is going, no.
No, it's
You're an
pretty,
idealist, young lady.
Yes, I am.
Oh,
it's
that's
pretty
fine. Stay
specific
that
from
way.
how the state has capped 100 series that they have no growth in government
Okay.
whatsoever. So
Okay.
just from that, I would say they don't want any growth from any entity of state
I
government.
hear you.
That's how I read that.
Okay.
And Mr.
You're closer to it than I am, so you would know.
Mr. Chairman, Trustee Little, I think that's the reality of it, is that many folks have wanted to somehow control that. And they've struggled with how they can actually control that with the university and the community colleges. And I think a lot of them have identified, I'm generalizing to legislators, but I think they've identified that one of the ways they could control employee growth is by controlling health insurance reimbursement. And that's why it's a hot button topic. With the revenue picture, the latest Craig report, I mean, it's a political platform position, not a rational position. I got a great lecture on human irrationality or non-rationality. I'd love to share with you sometime, but it is not a rational decision. It's really is driven by other motivations. And so we will likely face some of that pushback. And, I just want you to be prepared should it come your way. Certainly if it does, kick it to me, but it's very possible that, we'll get that. I don't think it'll be to the extent that some of our other colleges in the state, because they've grown much more dramatically, I would say. We are still below the number of policies than what we had before the 2016 cuts. There are campuses that are substantially higher.
But they're not Lemony County.
No.
No.
This is the rub, and that's also, I shall say on that.
Vice President Johnson.
On that note.
So now we'll get to the tabs later in the book. Those can be somewhat confusing, so I tried to pull together the highlights. Board Book 24, you see an auxiliary fund summary. We're up 166,000 going into next year. Our auxiliaries on campus have just been, they've never been stronger. They've never been stronger since I've been here, and I think for even before that. Part of this up is we are increasing the room rates in the residence halls by 2%, and that's per our viability model that we built for the new res hall and existing res halls that are in place. And so that's very intentional on our part. It makes, in part, our model work and keeps our rates still in a very reasonable position relative to the other colleges. Board rates, on the other hand, what the students pay for their dining, their meal plans, we're holding at zero. I was confronted with a price increase across the board from Sodexo for 3.51%, and I just couldn't swallow it. Working collaboratively with Judy and James Miller, we fully assessed it, and I held the line and I said, I'm not giving you an increase. And there's been some challenges in our dining operation that they haven't overcome. And so I had the epiphany. The model that Sodexo has always had for this campus is they present us inflationary data. Our meat prices are going to go up X, and our this and that, and labor, wage increases. And while the campus hasn't been getting any wage increases, they're customers. And then that drives a percentage amount that they need to raise the prices so as to keep them whole. And all the way along, I had always taken the position on behalf of the college that this was a terrible model because they could drive the business in the ground and then come to me with price increases to recover the loss. And so where we ended up is it occurred to me that we needed to flip this model. And so working with Judy and the president, we proposed that we put them on an incentive, a performance incentive model. And this is completely flipping the whole long history that we've had with Sodexo. We have some unspent bookstore revenue, bookstore commission revenues that we use for student scholarships, but we've never fully spent it out. So there's some accumulation there. So we took the amount, they needed around $35,000. This 3.51% increase would generate them $35,000 and make them whole. We went back to them and I said, we're going to develop performance standards. So you can work on the areas where you need to improve. And March, we will evaluate how you did on those measures. And if you met or exceeded all of them, I'll write you a check for $40,000. And they took it. I didn't think they would. But it's completely flipped the dynamic now. What they've agreed to is performance-based, not our costs are rising based. So we'll see how it plays out. We've yet to fully define the performance standards, but we did issue a very lengthy survey to all faculty, staff, you may have saw it, and students to collect a baseline set of data. We're going to have that data by the 19th. And then Judy and I and James Miller will dig into that data and figure out where we can methodically build some performance standards around where they need to improve. And it'll be irrefutable. And hopefully it'll be clear enough that when the college gets to March to do that evaluation, the plan will be in place and the conclusions can be arrived at. If they don't meet them, we won't write that check for $40,000. And so I set that a little above the 35 just so there was an incentive to perform. So what's really cool about it is we've taken some money that was set aside to benefit students, these bookstore commissions, and now we're using it to put Sodexo on a performance basis, which benefits students because they're not getting a price increase. And so I guess sometimes when you seek a crazy solution, you end up with one. But yeah, that was, I feel really good about that. Lastly here, the Child Discovery Center is up 14%. It's just been a remarkable, 4 years with when I got here, and I've had nothing to do with this, it's the center, but they were generating a net deficit. Pretty substantial, actually. And now we're generating a net profit, and we haven't raised tuition. We have eliminated food, you may remember, but we got through that okay. And they're full. They're bursting at the seams over there. And if we had a way to build a new center, we could fill a new center. And there's an opportunity there to pursue that. And I think we talked about that at the master plan. So anyway, that's a wrap up on why auxiliary is up 166. Moving forward to restricted funds, these are the funds we get from the feds, the state, local grants, and private grants. And that's down $1.9 million. If you turn to page 25 of your board book, you'll see this outline of all these federal, state, local, and private grants. I don't have that to put on the screen, but if you look at that, you'll see the Pell Grant row on page 25 is down 1.5 million. The reason that's down is it's literally just an adjustment in, they've looked at their actuals and then adjusted it down to be more precise. It's not so much that there's been a negative hit there. It's an alignment adjustment. And then the other difference of the 1.9 is the pass-through grants are down 382,000. They're not problems, it's just these grants have specific amounts by year, and when you total them up for this given year, it's 382 less. All other grants, pretty much a nominal change. I think if you look across on page 25, those various amounts you'll see they're relatively the same. A couple years ago, Trustee Erickson asked for some historical data be laid into this picture, so now we've got 3 years worth in there. We'll keep building that out that way. Moving on to the plant fund tab. Oops. Endowment fund tab, board book, page 33. This is always a hard one. We have this corpus, the LCCC portion of the foundation corpus. Every year we allocate $500,000 for scholarships out of that corpus. We then typically spend somewhere close to $500,000. And it just represents this one piece of the corpus. It's kind of an oddity in this budget book framework. But the important piece here is that for next year, the plan support by the foundation will be nearly $1 million. Wonderful support that we get from the foundation. Now the plant fund tab, page 36. This one you can't tie numbers to the cost of our projects because there's carryover from last year and there's a lot of residual stuff in there, but that budget's up 11.7 million. It's due to the projects that are coming on and the net of all those gyrations. I would point out though on page 37 of your board book, there's a complete listing of major maintenance projects, which just reminding you that comes from state dollars that we receive, and then minor maintenance projects, which we capture on the 1 mil. So that details on page 37. That's kind of our plan. That plan each year never plays out quite like we think it might. There's always twists in the road and whatnot, but it's a good working plan. It's a methodically thought through plan of where these funds need to be invested year over year. And then lastly, board book page 7 is the summary table of everything we just went through. And I won't spend any time on those pieces. They all flow through there in their sum totals. And that concludes my presentation on the first reading. I'm happy to take any questions. While I have the,
Mr. Chair, one of the things that we've done in the past, and I know I have followed through on that, is had a series of questions and I'd get together with Jane and she would provide some answers on those. So I would encourage each of us, now that we have the book and we have a chance to really study it and we have some additional questions, Jane will be more than happy to respond and address those questions. But I did have another thought. I was wondering if there are questions that are going to be directed toward Jane, if maybe that might be done at the Finance and Facilities meeting. It's just an alternative to the way we've done it in the past. So I give some thought. What would you think, Jane?
That's fine.
Okay.
However you want to do it is fine.
Does that sound like an approach?
Yeah.
Well, I would like to have the questions beforehand.
Sure.
Okay,
If that's possible.
right. Good. Okay, well then, why don't we do that? Our next F&F committee is going to be at a different time. I wrote it down
That's
here.
gonna be the same as the,
Same as
same
the
as this.
board.
It's going to be the same as our regular board meeting, right? And it's scheduled for June 19 at 11 a.m., but could we move that up to 10 a.m.? So that we'd have some additional time for dealing with the questions. And if we're done by 11, we're fine, we're done.
Mr. Chairman, I might ask if you could find a way to pull those questions together, maybe a week or two ahead of that. So June, you will get an update and then you approve the budget on second reading in July. Since you're meeting the same day as the board update, if we could actually get those questions and you can compile them and then route them through me, then we could maybe be prepared, certainly to how you could have the conversation at F&F, but if there are questions that would lead to adjustments in the update for June, we'd want to have those built into that update for that evening. So
Let's have Mr. Chair, let's have our questions to you then by June 12th. Would that be adequate?
yeah, which the June, yeah.
Yeah, our F&F meeting will be on the.
Yep, that would be fine. Yep.
Sounds good.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Trustee Soto.
Is the F&F meeting then going to be at 10 o'clock instead of
Yes.
11 o'clock? Okay.
Vicki, do you? Vice President Johnson, thank you.
If I may.
Oh, sure, go ahead.
I just want to mention one thing. I spent 20 years working with the Board of Trustees at University of Wyoming, and then I spent 4 years or so working with governing board of the National Science Foundation, and then I spent about 4 years working with a very prominent advisory board at the University of Colorado, and then I came here. You all are the most amazing board I've ever experienced. And I just want to say it's been my distinct honor to stand before you and work with you.
Vice versa.
On to approval items.
Oh, sorry, startle. I'll power it up.
I had a 5 a.m.
Were you doing something?
Well, are we rebooting that back up for you, Starla?
Yeah, we need to.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh,
Mr.
sorry.
Chairman, maybe if you want to, while we get the computer booted back up, do your second approval item on the draft residency. Oh, we'll wait for the.
Well, and I'm gonna ask for a change to the policy.
You still have a quorum.
To have the discussion.
No.
Where are we? What are we doing? Are we pausing for a while here or
Why
what?
don't you just go ahead and hit that bottom?
It'll do. We're gonna wait for Wendy to come back.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead and hit that.
Want coffee?
Okay. And we got the computer up, so I guess we can move into that, so.
All right, we're back on approval. Number one.
Just to set the stage while they're going up there again, as we go through the year, when items exceed the authority of which you've allowed me to just make the go-ahead to purchase, so $60,000, it requires that they actually come to you as a board and you authorize the expenditure of the funds to do that. And so we have one of those items that they want to get moving for the radiography program. So I don't know, Clark, are you or Starla going to present this?
Well, I brought Starla Mason with us. She is the Dean of Health Sciences and Wellness. And I just want to say that she has been doing a phenomenal job, and she's been here about a year. We are really fortunate right now that all four deans we have we have a tremendous group. And the one thing that I'm really pleased is all four of them have come up through the ranks internally. That's not going to happen every time, but right now all four of them have come up through the ranks. Unfortunately, I'm not going to let her talk tonight. It's actually because she has a throat. She's told that she's not.
Supposed to be on total voice rest.
Oh, no.
Yeah, she's supposed to be on total voice rest. So
Answer questions.
yeah.
I was given permission to answer questions.
So I'm going to try and.
No graduation speech.
So what we're bringing is a request for approval for this device, which is this device. And it is a direct radiography unit, and it is to replace one that we have currently. We're replacing our current U-arm unit. The U-arm unit we have is actually one that is the operating system that it requires is Windows XP, so it's quite an older system, and so it's becoming obsolete, and so it's one that really needs to be replaced. And especially as we look at with the Medicare changes that are coming about, it's happening so that basically all medical facilities will be moving to this model. So this will be the standard out in industry, and it really just makes a lot of sense. So what we're looking at is that since this is a replacement of one we have, we can use up to 49% from Perkins funds. So we're planning to use 49% of the funding from Perkins. And then the other funding has been approved from the FY19 one-time funds if we can get your approval. So we're requesting approval for that.
Okay, motion?
I so move.
I second.
Okay, any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? There you go.
You know what? And actually, I forgot to show the video that she prepared for us.
Yeah, oh, let's see the video.
Yeah.
We made Starla sit through that entire budget.
Videotaped it in a where, but it's not our lab. I don't know if it's coming, it's not coming up on.
You gotta close the PowerPoint, Clark.
You gotta close the power. Just. minimize the PowerPoint.
Okay, so let me play that.
Is 70.
And close that.
How about
There.
It's on. Oh,
Yeah.
here's
About
one open.
So our
70s.
lab does not look like that. That's their warehouse.
This is a digital detector plate. You get the touchscreen control panel. From here, you can automatically position the unit. Today, I'm going to show you how we can be positioned in. Today, we are going to show you the different positions you can have with the Axis U. Right now, what we have is that you are in the installation position. This is a good position for if you're doing, shots for the skull, or for the knees, or for the elbows. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna put the U arm in horizontal position.
And it also allows the operator to set the technique right there.
Just for
These
the
sites
upper
are
extremities. Now, we're gonna put it into the vertical position. This is the U arm in the vertical position. This position is very useful because let's say you have a patient who's hurting, they have broken bones, you can't move them.
Because it's
What you
one
can do is while they're on the exam table, you can
It's
move
newer than the old
exam
one.
table
Good to you.
under the X-ray tip.
you.
You do the exposure of any part of their body while they're laying on the table. And this right here is the whole point of this unit, is to be able to make an exposure of any body part without having to move the patient.
There you go.
There you go.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Yep.
We'll all come down to be scanned when.
Yes, we will, yeah.
Okay, so we should close this.
Yeah. Still got young kids, they break stuff. all the time.
Not your voice.
Thank you, Stella.
Can't have anything nice until they're.
No. Until they're out of the house.
They still live with that.
Okay, now. Approval item B, the employee residence requirement policy draft.
And, go ahead, Wendy.
Well, I'm gonna make a motion that we approve, and check me on my language here, is are we approving or adopting this policy as drafted and asking Dr. Schaefer to develop a policy and move it through the process?
Procedure.
Procedures.
Yeah. Move the
To-
procedure forward.
Right.
Through Dr. Schaefer.
I second.
Okay. Now, discussion you want to do.
Yes, I have a point of discussion. So, as many of you know, the man I live with used to work in HR, and he was the superintendent of schools when they implemented this policy in Laramie County School District number 1. So I asked him to read it, and he found an issue in the paragraph 2.0 under persons affected that brought them problems when they first issued the policy. He said, at Laramie 1, we had that same type of language, and where it says employees hired or rehired after July 1st, 2019, that are classified as administrators and under LCCC procedure, blah, blah, blah. Employees classified as administrators prior to this date are exempt from this policy. They had similar wording, and he said what happened with them is they had administrators living in Laramie County who said, I want to move to Fort Collins, and I can because I'm not affected by this policy. And of course, that's not what they intended, but they said, I can because that's what the policy says. So he recommended that we instead use the language for the second, well, this is the language he recommended. Employees classified as administrators currently having their primary residence outside the college's service area of Laramie and Albany counties prior to July 1st, 2019 are exempt from this policy. So I ran it by Tara, and Tara, I think, do you agree that that's a good change?
I think it effectuates the intent and addresses the concern that you've identified.
Yeah. And he said, I had no idea anybody would read it that way, but they did. That's
a very good point.
Yes.
So anyway, I would ask that we amend the policy, and I can send this language to Tammy or Tara or whoever needs to get it.
Yes. You can get it to me, it's just fine.
Okay, I'll send this to you. Send to Tara.
So since that's a friendly amendment, we still have to vote on it, correct?
Well, it's an amendment to the policy.
Right.
Right.
So you do need to vote on it.
Yes.
There's a motion, and a second
Yes.
on Well, there's a motion and a second on the,
Original,
On
but
the
we
original.
need, she needs to move the
and then you
amendment.
moved your amendment on the policy.
I move my amendment on the policy.
And I need a
I'll
second.
second that.
All those in favor on the amendment to the policy?
Discussion on them.
Discussion on the amendment? Or- Oh, yeah, sorry, discussion. Is there any discussion on it? All those in favor of the amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
No.
Motion passes. Bob and Don. Now, we're back on the policy. So discussion on the policy.
Mr. Chair,
Trustee Erickson.
I'd like for you to indulge me and the other trustees so that I can explain my no. I have a couple reasons. One, I expressed once before, I consider it to be somewhat discriminatory, and I'll speak more to that. Secondly, I think it's provincial. And third, as far as it pertains to dealing with emergencies here at our college, I don't believe it's necessary. So let me deal with the first item of fact that I consider it to be discriminatory. As if you read the policy, the requirement that all employees defined as administrators, and that the board of trustees have determined that administrators have a special need to develop strong community relationships to gain a greater understanding, and that the board of trustees of LCCC have identified that administrators of the college hold the primary responsibility for continuous management of the organization, and in the event of emergencies, the timely response to key operational and safety concerns. If you read the descriptions of the administrator role is, as an administrator, an employee is responsible for the management of the institution or a customarily recognized department or subdivision thereof. Administrator positions are typically considered to be exempt from the overtime provisions of the Fair Labor Standards Act. If you read the professional description, there's a lot of language in here that appears to be somewhat administrative. For example, the professional employee category includes positions which carry the primary responsibility of managing and or performing specialized academic support, student service, and organizational institutional support functions. And also, professional positions are typically considered to be exempt from the overtime provisions of the Fair Labor Standards Act. I think that we have another class of employees that could possibly be perceived as coming under this policy, even though it says specifically administrators. Now, I indicated earlier that I thought this was a discriminatory policy. I don't think that we should do this for any of our employees. I think that our employees, wherever they live, I expect that they're going to be good community people here in this community. So don't get my statement that because professionals are not included with this class of administrators, that I'm looking to include professionals in this group. I'm not. I don't think that any of our individuals that work for us should have to comply with this type of a policy. I said it was, I believe it's provincial. This community has been striving to be cosmopolitan, to be forward. We even have a greater forward, greater Cheyenne that is looking to expand our horizon, to bring people to this community, to encourage people to come to this community. And just because they may live in Wellington, they're not going to work for us if they're an administrator under this definition. Okay, to me, I think that that is somewhat provincial. We're just kind of hate to use the word, but I think a phrase I think is somewhat narrow-minded. To be looking at a requirement that people in this country, many people, we might hire someone to work for us that won't, in the future, won't even be on campus. Maybe working online. I don't know whether that's the possibility. Now, I also indicated that I don't think that this is necessary, because we have in here language that says for safety reasons. Well, we just recently got this little booklet that has emergency procedures. Most of our people that work for us, if there's going to be some type of emergency that happens during the daytime, they'll be here. Now, but there is an area here that says after hours emergencies. And this is the recommendation. If there is evidence of forced entry, severe vandalism, natural gas odors, visible physical damage from the elements, water or wind damage to the building, and maybe some others, first thing to do is call 911 from a safe place. And then it says, call the campus safety office. That's the first place to go, and then the chain of command comes in with the president of our facility. And he then, in turn, would have others that he may see as necessary to come, but not likely, not likely. At least according to what I look here at this responding to emergency procedures, I don't think this particular policy is even needed. But if we're concerned about having individuals from our administrator's classification be pulled here to do whatever they have to do. In fact, probably the campus campus officer would probably say, well, we don't want everybody coming at once. We want to only have those that you believe should be here at a given time. Okay, now, last point. I've really been struggling with this. I said to myself, I talked to a number of people and I say to myself, why the hell are you interested in not interested in this? It does sound, hey, if you work in Cheyenne, live in Cheyenne, that sounds good, doesn't it? It really does. Sounds good. You work in Laramie County, live in Laramie County. Well, I got to go back to a little bit of history. And I hate to be somewhat professorial on this one, but I have here the Declaration of Independence. And it says, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Do you know when this draft of the Declaration of Independence was first written? John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. They didn't have happiness in there. They had life, liberty, and the pursuit of property. You know, the dream of having your own property, having your own home, that was the basis of the definition of happiness. So this kind of, when I started looking at that, I said to myself, you know, Don, I am going to speak why I'm against this particular policy. So thank you for the opportunity to express my opinion.
Okay. Any other discussion for me? Okay, well, Bob, go ahead.
As you know, I expressed my point of view last meeting as well on this. And I haven't changed my mind, obviously. And part of the reason, if we just listen to the presentation we had at our dinner meeting, what we were trying to do is reduce barriers to entry for our students. But now, with this policy, just keep it at a high level, we're trying to increase barriers to entry for our employees. To me, it seems like we're double-minded in that thinking. So I'm pretty concise in my statements like that, so I'll just leave it at that. But the second thing is, as a general principle, in terms of the way I live my life, the less rules, the better. So I'm kind of trying to figure out why have a rule that's not needed? Because I don't believe you can legislate loyalty. I think that's internal. That's something that belongs in the person. It's not something that policy is going to make happen. And I'm focusing on these paragraph 2 in that section 1 when it says that. So if your intent is to legislate loyalty, maybe there's other ways to do that. And maybe you don't need a policy for that. My wife was an HR professional. As long as you've been married, she's been doing that. And she's counseled executives at the highest level. And she worked at EchoStar in her second career. I went to college. She came here to Cheyenne. 20% of their employees moved or drove from Colorado to work here in Cheyenne. I can't imagine if they had told their space flight satellite control engineers, well, you have to live in Laramie County for us to employ you. It just seemed counterintuitive. They were looking at getting a job done rather than having some rule for the people to follow. So I'll leave it at that.
Any other discussion? Okay, well, I will say a few things. Mainly, why I'm proposing this is for the future of the college. If we have a new president, there's nothing saying that the president has to live in Cheyenne. So when they call the safety campus officer for that security problem that lives in Fort Collins, and the president lives in Fort Collins as well, who's going to take care of that situation? There's nothing preventing anything in the future. I'm trying to set this up for future trustees, people, if that does happen, when we get another president, that won't happen. That transition would be a smooth one. There's guidelines making the president and his cabinet live within this community. There's 3 other things I feel. It would be, a vote yes for this is a vote for Laramie County Community College. A vote yes is for Laramie County. A vote yes is for Wyoming. In my opinion, a vote no is for Colorado. And I do not feel that we need to be outsourcing our people to Colorado to live. They need to be in the community and work in the community, if that's so be it. So vote it up, vote it down. I guess there's more discussion.
May I have a second opportunity to say something?
Well, let's let Trustee
go ahead.
Merrill.
You said something that was very much on my mind, and that is, you said the president and his cabinet. I would be for that, because I know that when Dr. Schaefer is hunting, he asks usually one of his VPs to take over the campus safety. Or going to Mexico or wherever.
It's a fair assumption of where I would be. Okay.
The only thing I thought about this is that I wouldn't want to go 32 or 34 people deep. I think the president and the cabinet, for me, is adequate, because they are the people that are on call.
I think it was 16 people. Was it 16?
I heard 30 at one time, so I don't know that.
That would be if it was supervised, I believe. We went to the administration, which was
Yeah, and I thought that
deans,
at one time was something we
administrators.
were talking about, so.
But let's,
18 is what I have, and 6 are not.
right, so I think it was 18. Yeah.
And then 6
Because
are not, but I know
Tony-
that 6 are out.
The president, the cabinet, and
Deans.
the deans,
That's
deans
considered
are
the
there?
administration.
7 or 8 or something.
Mr. Chairman, I think Vice
Wait.
President Mays is looking at that
Yes.
information.
Okay, thank you.
It's
I have 18.
18, and that's predominantly, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, that's predominantly the vice presidents, executive directors, deans, and it seems like there's a smattering of other positions that I'm not thinking of off the top of my head that qualify as administrator.
And the question I would like to ask you, Dr. Schaefer, is how many times have you reached down to somebody below the vice president's level to be in charge when you leave the college?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I've never, in terms of acting president, that always is the cabinet members to do that, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, trustee Erickson.
Well, our president is under a contract. And if that is a concern of the Board of Trustees, to have that written in the contract, we could have it in the contract.
Okay, I don't know contract information, but I don't know why you would go through that hassle if you feel that everybody should live wherever they want to. I don't feel that if you're a trustee and we have a new president, that you would want that in the contract as well. I myself feel there needs to be some sort of
No,
regulation.
I
of who-
totally agree with you with the president being a resident of this community because of access, being a real intimate part of the community, as Dr. Joe is. Unlike at one time we had a director at the hospital who lived in New Mexico and flew back and forth every weekend to Albuquerque, and that obviously didn't work. Did not work. So I would have no problem with this policy being addressed to the president, that he has to live, whoever the president is, has to live within Laramie County.
Questions? Thank you.
Did you sneeze?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, trustees.
trustees, trustee Erickson, and it's nice to hear your comments also, but, I think there's in the policy, there's an exception that can be granted if there's someone in Wellington, as you said, or someone online. So we have that in the policy, right? That's the.
No.
Goes to the president. Oh, I thought we were gonna put that in.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
If I may, so this is simply the policy decision to have some type of residency requirement as it relates only to the position of administrators.
Okay.
If you move forward with this policy, you have also tasked for Trustee Soto's motion, Dr. Schaefer, with drafting the procedure that would go along with the policy, which would include those exception provisions.
Correct.
There's there's more process that has to go through this.
And Mr. Chair, the last paragraph does speak to that. In fact, if I were supportive of this particular motion as amended, I would make another amendment because there's in here, it says that we would charge the president with establishing any necessary administrative procedures. The any necessary is kind of loose. I would think that establishing administrative procedures would be a more direct statement for what the president would be doing. But I'm not speaking for that amendment because I'm speaking against the motion.
And Mr. Chairman, another thought that I had is, this is an issue that, I've heard in the community too, that I think it's something that they've been talking about. So that's something that's one reason why I was behind it also, the community. And Tammy, if I may ask, of those 18, am I right, 6 of them are out of state right now? 3. Oh, 3 is all, okay, because I had 6 as a number, so thank you. So we're just looking at 3 people, and I like the whole idea of them being in the community, as I had said before, and as Laramie County School District number 1 had done, they've had no decline in applications, they still have good quality people.
It's 6.
It is 6? So I feel strong, I still feel strong to move this forward for those reasons.
Are you calling for the question?
Mr. Chairman, may I make a comment as well?
Yes, trustee Soto.
I am going to follow up on trustee Thompson's comment. When I was running for this office, there were people in the community who commented, and they were unrealistic. Obviously, we don't have that many people who actually live in Colorado, but there's a perception in the community that there are a lot of employees here who live in Colorado. So, and I agree with the portion of this policy that talks about being committed to our community, that's an important part of those positions. And so I'm also in favor of the policy.
Okay, we ready to vote? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed?
No.
No. Motion passes. Correct.
No, I don't think we do.
So, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, based on that, just kind of walk you through the next steps. So I'll work with your legal counsel. We'll make the modifications per the amendment to the policy. I'll draft an administrative procedure for how we would implement this. That then starts the internal process. So after we get to that point, it'll start at the president's cabinet, and then it'll go out to consultative feedback. Feedback will come in, we'll modify based on that feedback, and then it'll go to college council for their recommendation to me. The procedure then stops with me, and then ultimately I will make a recommendation back to you on the specific policy as it goes through. Because it's originating from you, you will likely see, or I will likely share any of the consultative feedback that we get, especially on the policy components of it, so that you're at least aware of that. But that'll be the process. Because we're going into the summer months, it'll be September before you see it, and possibly October, just because we don't have a lot of great consultative feedback over the summer with so many of the faculty off contract to do that. And so, so you could expect seeing something probably in early fall as it routes through that process.
Good. Thank you. All right. Trustee Cadle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We got an update, a good update from Vice President Johnson regarding the ACC expansion project, so that looks good. Dr. Hammond and I had even a discussion coming over here in the car this evening, talking about BOCES. It's still a hot topic. We moved the needle maybe a little bit in the last 30 days, he tells me. He's working on trying to get some numbers out of the Allegheny County School District with regards to the culinary program, that budget and staff and so forth. And then also we're trying to gather information with regards to the early childhood development program and what those numbers might look like. The advisory board of the ACC did meet last Friday, in which Dr. Hammond gave them an update on both BOCES and the building expansion. And they're all in favor of it. I think we all agreed that maybe as soon as those numbers are available, that then we'll kind of kick in the advisory group to try and help us do whatever we need to do to start lobbying and putting hopefully ever so light, if not heavy pressure on certain Allegheny County School Board members. So.
Mr. Chairman, just a question, Trustee Cato. Have we had the opportunity to sit down with the current chair of the trustees?
Not yet.
I'm wondering if
Circling around the superintendent, seems like.
would it be, we may want to think about strategically setting that up, and maybe Chair Ketchum could help us maybe facilitate that conversation, chair to chair, to get to it.
Yeah, the steps are too small. I'd like to see it more. That would be great. I think that we're at that point. As soon as we get some numbers, I think that's really important. We know those programs and numbers, but I think that'd be a great suggestion, Dr. Schaefer, that start putting a little bit more pressure on those key players.
Once we get those numbers, then I'll ask Associate Vice President Hammond to get with me, and I'll get with you, and we'll see if we can get a meeting set up.
Sure.
Just to keep pushing that forward.
Sure. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, may I ask a clarification question?
Sure.
Is it the culinary arts program and the early childhood development program that you're using as the initial pilot programs for the BOCES? Is that, I read something like that, I think in the last minutes, but I want to make sure.
Yeah, Trustee Wood,
Okay,
those two programs sound like we could generate
yeah,
a lot of community support.
yeah.
Grab some population that would be hopefully pretty supportive of getting the BOCES passed.
Yeah.
There might be some other things that we could hopefully move into that BOCES budget,
Right,
down the road, but those two things we're trying to really,
is where you're starting.
yeah.
Excellent.
And I think
Okay.
Dr. Hammond had a comment.
One of the reasons we're focusing on culinary in particular is because in speaking with the principal over there, that's an area he has focused on. But even in terms of the successes they're having, we spoke with the culinary instructor, and I think maybe 6 students, I can't remember the number exactly, but they got, I think, over $30,000 in scholarship money and just from one competition recently. So to give those students a trajectory out of there currently, if they want to go into culinary, they can go to CWC or Sheridan, and both of those state that you're going to Jackson if you go there. So Southeast Wyoming is effectively sort of left out of the mix. But we have such great success there that to bring that industry and give it an outlet, hopefully either in Albany County or here, would be a tremendous boon to the community in Albany County in particular.
Yeah, thanks, Brady, that makes sense. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, trustee Adel. Okay, now, student trustee, is there anything from the student side? Trustee Merrill, no report, okay. Just thought I'd ask. I don't have any new business. Looks like we need to vote on the meeting for July 8th on Monday, based upon you were correct, based upon the state holiday on the 10th of July. Is everybody fine with that date, or do you want to do the Tuesday, or, I mean, does it matter either?
I'll be missing.
You'll be missing, okay, that's fine.
But I'll know what you're talking about.
Right, it's the budget, and right, that's the main reason why we have to have.
Mr. Chairman, I guess the straw poll, you will have to have a quorum because we need to approve the budget. So who will not be there?
What is the date you decided on?
July 8th,
July 8th, and
it's
that
a
is what?
Monday.
Monday.
It's after the 4th of July weekend.
Oh, okay.
I guess the whole-
What?
So I think we're okay.
Okay, yeah.
Quorum, don't we? Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, all those
I'll be
in
here.
favor of having the.
It's fine. You don't.
We don't need to vote, okay,
We'll just
Budget
make the
approval, just
adjustment
say,
on there. Yep.
perfect. Okay, is there any public comment? Public comment? Okay, now we need to move into executive session for a naming opportunity.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we move into executive session to discuss a naming opportunity.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, all those in favor, please say aye. All those opposed? Okay, we're in executive session.
Usually it says,
Yeah.
if there is a need for an executive session. What was it named? Okay.